So if you need any kind of information from different surveys, Pew Research and Gallup both have a huge amount of surveys available for all kinds of ideas. And if you want research, because you hear a lot of the, well, there's 52% of people believe this. These kinds of these kinds of organizations are really good at helping you figure out what information is truthful and useful. And again, these are pretty reliable as opposed to some of the other options that are out there. You definitely want to evaluate the sources that you are pulling information from. Remember, you establish your own credibility in your introduction, but you also need to have these other sources to back up what you're saying. They need to be credible too. And if they aren't credible, that hurts your own credibility. I mentioned earlier that Josh Hawley had posted that thing about incorrectly quoting Patrick Henry. People jumped all over that, and immediately the credibility drops of the person who does the original misquote, in other words. And the same is true. People who just put up sites, or people who intentionally put up sites with false information just because they know people are going to put stuff up there, right? And when you do that, it comes back to bite you because now your credibility comes into question. So you want to look at authorship. On any site that you find, look for somewhere on there is going to be who wrote it. You need to know the name of the person who wrote it, and are they credible? What makes them credible? So, for example, if it's somebody's done something about sports, and let's say, I told you we had the guy that did baseball for everything. Let's say he's talking about a baseball player and he's got a source from the internet. He goes and he reads all this information about this player on the internet, and let's say it's got the author's name on it. Okay, how is this author credible? Is it a sports writer or a former sports person or sportscaster or a fellow teammate or something like that? Or is it just some guy who likes him and put a website together as a tribute? That might be useful, but tribute type information is not always accurate and truthful. There's other sources out there that would be better to use. So find out who wrote it. Are they credible? Are they biased? That's another important information. For example, there was an assignment, and I don't think it's up there, and I don't think it's part of the assignment anymore, but you had to evaluate whether or not somebody had used Mike Pence as a source with regarding tobacco use and smoking. Mike Pence is not a credible source for smoking, right? He at one time, prior to becoming a representative in the U.S. Congress, owned a bunch of convenience stores that sold cigarettes. So he got actually money from the tobacco industry. And when he decided to run for office, he got quite a few contributions from the tobacco industry, which means, okay, he's not unbiased now. He's getting money from a tobacco company. That means that he's going to have some favorability to them because they helped him get to where he is. You got to look for that kind of stuff. There was another source. There used to be a website, I don't think it's up anymore, but it was called diabetes.com. And the theory was that you could go there for all your information about diabetes and what it was and the different kinds and how to treat it and all that stuff. So you would go there, and when you got down to how to treat it, there'd be 4 or 5 drugs listed. But as it turned out, all of those drugs came from the same drug manufacturer, and none of the other drugs that were out there to deal with diabetes were listed. And when you got to the very bottom and found out who owned the site, it was a drug company that owned the site. It was a drug company that made those drugs. So you have to look for that because obviously they're going to be biased. So you have to find out who wrote it. Is it sponsored? Like the site that's owned by the drug company is not going to be unbiased and say, hey, here's other drugs from other companies that work just as good. They're not going to do that, especially in the kind of capitalistic climate that we have here in the United States. So is the site sponsored? Is it impartial? Is it objective? Or is it there as sort of an advertising tool to get people more interested in that particular topic, but it's presented as news. You also, I know most of you don't watch the news, but we will see a lot of these on the news now where they appear to be news stories, and they're purposely commercials placed in the middle of the news hour. And it seems like it's a reporter presenting a news article, and in actuality, it's an ad. And it's a sponsored ad. And so you've got to look for authorship, sponsorship, and then the other one is recency. How old is the information that you've got? Because let's face it, there's stuff on the internet that's 20 years old now, 25 years old. On almost any topic you can think of, there's newer research out there. So if you're going to pull up some site and use it as a source, if it's 10 years old, go try to find some other sources that are newer, but corroborate and say the same, say the same thing, or maybe things have changed since then, and there's newer, more accurate information out there. So you want to always look at authorship, sponsorship, and recency for every website that you look at. And of course, you're going to look at all kinds of research, right? Most people go to .coms. That's the most common website out there. You want to beware of .coms. Check authorship, sponsorship, recency, always on those, and then find other sources that agree with what that particular source says, because it's real easy to have one site, and I've seen this used in arguments a ton of time. Oh, but this site over here said exactly what I'm saying, so I went with it. Yeah, that's confirmation bias for one thing. And for another, are there any other sources out there that corroborate what that source does? There's not. So that makes that a questionable source. Plus, .coms and the next one, .org, people think, oh, it's a .org, it's probably reliable because you have to pay for it. Most of the sponsored ones are .orgs. And yes, you have to pay for them just like you do the .coms, but anybody can have a .com, anybody can have a .org. And that means that since anybody can have it, anybody can put anything they want up on the internet, whether it's true or not, because there's no rules about putting false information on the internet, right? You can put whatever you want to. You can say, you know, the world is shaped like a cylinder and put a whole website about that. And there's nobody to refute that and say you can't do that because it's not true. Hey, that's my opinion. I can put it out there. And so you have to be very careful with .coms and .orgs and also .nets. .nets is the other one. Again, authorship, sponsorship, recency. Dig into those. If you can't find the author, don't use it. If you can't find, usually it'll have the author's name, and a lot of times it's hyperlinked, so you can go find out the author's background and what their educational experience is and what their work experience is and what makes them credible on that topic. If you can't find that, probably shouldn't use it. If you find a website that's sponsored, you at least need to mention that this is a sponsored bit of information, so people go, well, how reliable is that? And you also want to make sure recency on all of these three. These are all questionable immediately, especially in the academic world. Professors are going to go, well, let me go check this website out and see if they're really reliable or they're, you know, some fly-by-night thing. Then you get into .govs, and as we've already discussed, .govs by law are required to be accurate, truthful information. So they're a lot more reliable when you get information from a .gov. People don't really question it a whole lot. The other one that they don't usually question is an edu, because EDUs all are tied to educational bodies. So ivtech.edu, iu.edu, the grade schools, the high schools, they all have EDUs. Probably you're not going to use a grade school EDU for a source, but you might use IU, you might use Ivy Tech's library, for example. In those cases, you still should look at authorship, sponsorship, and recency, but typically in the EDU, it's going to be accurate, because a university or a college is only as good as its information is truthful and accurate. And all of the universities know that. And a lot of the universities, of course, are tied to the state, like Ivy Tech is part of the government of the state of Indiana. So we're actually required by law to only have truthful stuff up. So EDUs are reliable. The one thing you definitely want to check for the most is recency, because we store everything. EDUs store everything as far back as they can. So always look for the most recent stuff that's available if you're using an EDU. But typically, EDUs and GOVs are sound, reliable, useful resources. The others I'd be a little careful with. And then, of course, there's Wikipedia. And I know you all have probably heard this by now. You probably are all going to say, oh, I know we can't use Wikipedia. But invariably, I get 2 or 3 people every semester that use Wikipedia as a source. You cannot use Wikipedia as a source from an academic standpoint, because anyone can be a Wikipedia editor. I've been a Wikipedia editor for 15 years. I used to do this in class. I stopped doing it because I got to thinking about what if some poor kids actually do in a paper. But I would pick somebody, an actor or somebody, Matthew McConaughey, and I would pull up Matthew McConaughey's Wikipedia page, and right in front of the class, I would kill him off. So he would suddenly have his death date on Wikipedia, and I could write a short little chapter that said, a safe fell out of a building and landed on Matthew McConaughey's head and killed him, and save that to the Wikipedia page. Now, other Wikipedia editors are going to see that a page change has been made to Matthew McConaughey, because we do all check each other. But for a little bit, that information is going to be up that Matthew McConaughey got killed by a safe falling from the sky. And some little kid could be writing a paper about Matthew McConaughey and just happen to hit when that's on there and write down in their paper or their presentation that Matthew McConaughey died, and then it spreads like wildfire. And real life examples of that have happened a lot of times. There was a football coach named Joe Paterno at Pittsburgh, he was at Penn State. He was at Penn State, and he was not doing well, and he was sick, but he hadn't died. And Wikipedia listed him as dead 4 times in the 48 hours before Joe Paterno really died. Same thing happened with Tom Petty. Tom Petty was listed as dead in Wikipedia a day before he was actually dead. So you want to be careful trusting Wikipedia. Now, what you can do with Wikipedia is all of Wikipedia's sources, if the editor that puts the article in is careful and does it like they're supposed to, there's a number next to each fact, just like you would have in an essay. And down at the bottom is the list of all the supporting articles that tell you that the fact up there at the top is true. Sometimes that gets done and there's no source down below. You can't use the Wikipedia part, but you can, like if it's, Matthew McConaughey died from a safe falling on him and there's a 14 there. That means it's the 14th sort down at the bottom. And you click on the 14, it takes you to the bottom. It tells you the article where it says that. You can go to that, check author sponsor recency. If it turns out to be useful, you can use that as a resource, but you can't use Wikipedia. So the one thing that's good about Wikipedia is it's a reliable source to go to find other sources. You just can't rely on it in and of itself. That gets shot down on a daily basis pretty much by all of us. So where else can you go besides the internet? There's a lot of other places. We have a library. Ivy Tech has a library. We have a library downstairs. I'm up in my office right now. We have a library downstairs. We have a library on every single campus. They are all interconnected on My Ivy. And you can go to the website for the library at any time you want to and do a search. And anything we have in any one of the campus libraries comes up and you can check it out. But we also have, what's really nice is access to Ask a Librarian. And librarians are trained research specialists. They can find more information than you can possibly imagine. And if you need help, you ask a librarian and they will bring more stuff than you know what to do with. So it's a fantastic source of information that's out there, and you don't have to use all of it yourself. You can have the librarians help you. You can go down to the library and talk to them, and there's a wealth of information down there. We also have agreements with libraries in other universities and all around the world. And at times you can even bring stuff from you can have other universities send their stuff here so that we can use it and send it back, that kind of thing. So the library is a huge resource for information, for speeches and essays and all of that kind of stuff. There's also, you've got all all the catalogs of information. That's the other thing, is they've got a great search system set up in a library if you don't know how to use the Dewey Decimal System. There's also virtual libraries on the internet. IPL is the Internet Public Library.org, and it has access to libraries all around the world. So maybe there isn't a library in Indiana that has it, but let's say a library in Georgia does. We go into IPL.org and do a search, and that can come up, and you might not be able to pull the physical book, but you can pull it up on the internet and still use it for research. It's an incredibly useful thing to have, these internet public libraries. There's another one, that's the virtuallibrary.org. Both of these are very good sources for finding information, and they have librarians who work for them who also can help you doing research. So really good sources right there, and that's on the internet. Instead of going to Google, go to IPL.org and do your search there. Interviewing is another great source. Remember, testimony is a good, strong way to support what you're saying, especially if, well, in courtrooms, they use it all the time. That's how a lot of times we determine guilt or innocence. But maybe you're talking about, this is a little bit of a stretch, but let's say you're talking about something about the Vietnam War. There's Vietnam War vets out there. You could go interview one. I'm good friends with one, as a matter of fact. And they can tell you firsthand information that you can't get out of a book, and you can't get out of a web page and that kind of thing, and bring that in as support. And then you've got firsthand somebody who saw it, who lived it, who was there. That helps your believability, it helps your credibility, and it adds a nice story into your speech, where we already want to have stories, right? So if you've got a topic where interviewing somebody would be helpful, even if it's something like changing a tire, let's say I'm going to do, we already did this, the process speeches, but how to change a tire. And I want to bring in my buddy who works for a racing team in the IndyCar series, which I actually do have a friend who does that. I bring him in, and he actually does checking the tires as they come off the car and figuring out what's going on with tire wear and tread wear and all this stuff. He's a credible resource because he's doing this professionally as his career, analyzing tires and tire changes and stuff. He would help with supporting how to change a tire. You know, I'm liable to believe somebody who's working in the racing industry more than I am somebody who talked to their neighbor and they saw their neighbor change a tire once. You know, so interviewing is a very helpful way. Also, remember, your knowledge and experience is admissible as factual support. So you need 5 sources. You could be one of them. If you can establish yourself as being a credible source of information on your topic, there's no reason why you can't be using your experience. You just have to establish strongly that you have the right credibility to support the topic that you're talking about. So that's sort of quick with some interruptions, unfortunately. Phone rang twice, but I wanted to get this up as early this week as I could. Researching is extremely important for your papers, important for your speeches, but so too is figuring out where's the truth, where's the crap. And there are tools out there that help you cipher through some of that. So utilize them where you can. This becomes very important in your informative speeches, but especially in your persuasive speeches. You're persuading people to do stuff. You would like it to be based on actual, true, factual information and not some crap that got made up along the way. All right. So that's it for this. I'm going to put this up, and then we will have class with informative speeches. There's some makeup speeches to do as well. And I do anticipate us to take up almost our entire time on that. We almost did it with the process speeches, so I'm pretty sure we'll do it with these, and persuasive speeches will be the longest. We might do a quick discussion about the future speech that you have a week from Friday, which is the sales pitch mini speech. I may do a really short thing about that and let you see some examples, and then we'll call it a day. But that's it for now. I'll talk to you later.